Commander Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of her research vessel, watching distant stars blur past as her fingers absently traced the burn scars on her neck, permanent reminders of the accident that had first led her to this discovery. The ship's quiet hum was interrupted by the soft ping of incoming data, pulling her attention back to the central console where a pattern of waves danced across the holographic display. Running simulation sequence 47, she spoke into her log, voice steady despite her racing heart. The frequency maintains stability at ranges exceeding previous galactic communication limits. If these readings are accurate, she paused, allowing herself a small smile. We may have just changed everything. The frequency she discovered wasn't supposed to exist. It bypassed the established laws of physics that had governed interstellar communication for centuries, offering instant connection across vast distances. 6 months of secret research had confirmed what she'd initially thought impossible. Humanity had stumbled upon something revolutionary. A harsh alarm shattered her concentration. Red warning lights flooded the cabin as multiple ships dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding her small research vessel. Their sleek, crystalline designs marked them as assembly enforcement craft. Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd been discovered. Commander Chen. The voice that filled her cabin carried the distinctive harmonics of a tribunal elder. Power down your systems and prepare for boarding. You have violated Assembly Regulation 847, unauthorized advancement of communication technology. Sarah's mind raced. She'd known the risks when she began this research. The Assembly, a coalition of advanced species, strictly controlled technological progress, claiming it was for the greater good. Humanity, still considered young among the stars, wasn't supposed to make breakthroughs like this. My research is for the benefit of all species, she transmitted back, quickly initiating her data encryption protocols. The frequency could revolutionize how we connect across the galaxy. That is precisely why you must be stopped. The elder's voice carried no emotion. Progress must be controlled, measured, approved. Surely your species remembers the Cascade Wars. What unauthorized advancement cost us? The boarding happened swiftly. Assembly peacekeepers, their environmental suits gleaming with embedded technology far beyond human achievement, secured her ship. Sarah stood tall as they led her to the tribunal chamber, her researcher's whites standing in stark contrast to the organic architecture of the assembly vessel. The trial, if it could be called that, was brief. 3 tribunal elders, their true forms hidden behind sheets of shifting light, reviewed her data. Sarah watched as they accessed her findings, their disapproval radiating in waves of cold energy that filled the chamber. Commander Sarah Chen, the central elder spoke, your actions demonstrate why humanity requires continued supervision. You seek to run before learning to walk. Every species deserves the right to progress, Sarah argued, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. You can't keep controlling how we evolve. We can, and we must. The elder's form shifted, patterns of light intensifying. However, your discovery is significant. Death would be wasteful. Sarah's heart skipped. She'd expected execution, the usual punishment for major violations. The elder continued, instead, you will serve as an example. Exile to the outer rim, specifically to Kepler 771. The name sent whispers through the attending assembly members. Sarah knew of it. A harsh desert world, officially uninhabited. The kind of place the assembly sent problems they wanted forgotten. You'll have basic survival supplies, the elder declared. Perhaps in time, you'll understand why we must maintain order. Hours later, Sarah found herself aboard a transport, watching as her research ship was destroyed, her life's work scattered into space. The transport captain, a surprisingly sympathetic Arcarian, spoke softly as they approached Kepler 771. The assembly claims this world is empty, he said, multiple eyes blinking in sequence. But there are rumors. Strange energy readings, ships that vanish. If you're clever, and I suspect you are, You might find more than sand down there. As the transport prepared for atmospheric entry, Sarah clutched the small data chip she'd managed to hide, encoded with fragments of her research. The assembly thought they were burying her discovery. Instead, they might have just given her exactly what she needed, a place beyond their watching eyes. The descent was rough, the planet's atmosphere fighting them every meter of the way. Through the viewport, Sarah watched as an endless expanse of desert came into view, broken only by massive rock formations that rose like ancient sentinels from the sand. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, their light reflecting off crystalline structures half buried in the dunes. "This is your stop," the captain announced, bringing them down near a cluster of rocks that might offer shelter. "Official protocol says I'm supposed to wish you a contemplative exile." He paused, all four hands busy with landing sequences. "Unofficially, find what they're hiding here. Make them regret thinking a human would just lie down and die." Sarah stepped onto the scalding sand, her survival pack feeling inadequate against the harsh landscape stretching to every horizon. The transport lifted off, quickly becoming a speck in the green-tinted sky, leaving her truly alone. Also, the assembly believed. As the sound of engines faded, Sarah activated her handheld scanner, basic enough to have been allowed through her processing, but modified in ways the assembly hadn't detected. The crystalline structures that had caught her eye during descent were giving off faint energy signatures, their pattern naggingly familiar. "They resonate," she whispered, checking her readings again, "at exactly the same frequency I discovered." Sarah Chen smiled, despite the heat, despite the exile, despite everything the assembly had tried to take from her. They thought they were sending her to die. Instead, they might have just helped her prove exactly why humanity deserved its place among the stars. She shouldered her pack and began walking toward the nearest crystal formation. Somewhere in this desert, there were answers, and Sarah was going to find them, no matter what it took. The assembly had made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed that taking everything from her meant she had nothing left to lose. But they'd forgotten the one thing that made humans so dangerous. The more you tried to bury them, the harder they fought to rise. The first sun was setting as Sarah reached the crystal formation, its surface pulsing with a soft light that matched her scanner's readings perfectly. She placed her hand against it, feeling a faint vibration that seemed to resonate with something deep underground. "Well," she said to the empty desert, "let's see what you're hiding." The hunt for answers had begun. The crystal thrummed beneath Sarah's touch, its resonance growing stronger as darkness settled over the desert. She'd spent hours examining the formation, comparing its frequency patterns to the fragmentary data she'd managed to save. There was no doubt, these crystals were broadcasting on the same wavelength she'd discovered in deep space. A sudden shift in the sand nearly knocked her off balance. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the crystal's glow intensified. Sarah stumbled back, watching in amazement as a section of desert floor began to sink, revealing a perfectly engineered spiral staircase descending into darkness. "Now that's definitely not natural," she muttered, checking her scanner. The energy signatures were stronger now, pulsing from deep underground. Against all survival instincts, Sarah started down the stairs, her hand trailing along the wall for balance. The surface was smooth, almost organic in texture, covered in flowing patterns that seemed to shift in her peripheral vision. The stairway ended in a vast chamber that took her breath away. Crystalline columns rose from floor to ceiling, each one pulsing with internal light. Banks of unknown technology lined the walls, their displays showing readings in a script she'd never encountered. But what caught her attention was the figure standing at a central console, tall, humanoid, with skin that seemed to shimmer like the surface of a soap bubble. "We wondered how long it would take you to find your way down." The being spoke, its voice carrying musical undertones that made Sarah's ears tingle. "Though I must admit, you're doing better than most exiles. They usually spend at least a few days wandering the desert first." Sarah held her ground, mind racing. "You've been watching me." "We watch all of them." The being turned fully toward her, revealing multifaceted eyes that reflected the crystal light. "I am Venna, chief scientist of what remains of the Meridian Research Facility. And you, Commander Chen, have caused quite a stir up there." A graceful gesture indicated the ceiling, and by extension, space above. "You know who I am." Venna's skin rippled with patterns that Sarah somehow knew indicated amusement. "We monitor all assembly communications. Your trial was interesting, particularly your work with the frequency." "The same frequency these crystals are broadcasting," Sarah said, taking a careful step forward. "This isn't a coincidence." "No." Venna moved to one of the wall displays, bringing up a complex diagram that made Sarah's eyes hurt trying to follow it. "What you discovered in space, Commander, we discovered centuries ago. The Assembly's response was similar." Understanding dawned. "They exiled your entire species. Those of us they couldn't silence permanently." Venna's skin darkened momentarily. "But they made a mistake. They sent us to the very planet where we'd first detected the frequency, where its source lay waiting to be understood." More figures emerged from side chambers, other meridians, their skin displaying various patterns and colors. Each moved with the same fluid grace as Venna, their attention focused intently on Sarah. "We've continued our research in secret," Venna continued. "Building this facility, studying the crystals, learning to harness their power, but we've hit limitations. There are aspects of the frequency we still can't fully grasp." A pause, meaningful. "Perhaps a fresh perspective might help. A human perspective." Sarah's mind was already racing with possibilities. The technology around her was centuries ahead of anything humanity had achieved, yet these beings wanted her help. "The Assembly thinks they've buried both our discoveries," she said slowly. "They don't realize they've just brought them together." Venna's skin lit up with bright patterns. "Precisely. Will you help us, Commander Chen? Help us understand what the Assembly fears so much they'd exile entire species to hide it." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. One of the other Meridians rushed to a console, their skin flashing with urgent patterns. Energy surged from the northern crystal field. "Something's coming through." Venna moved with surprising speed to another display. "Impossible. The frequency has never demonstrated teleportation capabilities." But Sarah was already studying the readings, her experience with spatial anomalies kicking in. "That's because it's not teleportation," she said, pointing to a particular pattern. "It's more like folding. The frequency isn't moving matter through space, it's bringing 2 points in space together." The chamber shook as something massive impacted the surface above. Venna's skin rippled with concern. "Theory can wait. We need to secure the facility. If the Assembly has somehow detected us—" "That's not the Assembly," Sarah interrupted, her scanner picking up readings that made her blood run cold. "The energy signature is all wrong. Whatever just arrived, I don't think it's anything the Assembly knows about." Security screens showed a massive shake moving through the darkness above, its form seeming to shift and change as it moved. Crystal formations shattered in its wake, their fragments still pulsing with energy. "Well," Sarah said, already moving toward what looked like a weapons locker, "you wanted a human perspective. How about we start with humanity's talent for handling unexpected crises?" Venna's skin displayed a pattern Sarah hadn't seen before, something between worry and excitement. "You propose we confront it?" "No." Sarah checked the alien weapon's power core, quickly figuring out its basic functions. "I propose we study it. Whatever that thing is, it was drawn here by the same frequency you're all so interested in, which means it's part of the puzzle." Venna finished, their patterns shifting to match Sarah's determination. Meridian science and human adaptability, an interesting combination. The facility shook again, closer this time. Sarah grinned despite the danger. "Let's go make some observations." As they headed for the surface access, Sarah couldn't help but think how the Assembly's attempt to remove her from the equation had instead put her exactly where she needed to be. They'd tried to bury 2 species worth of scientific progress in these sands. Instead, they might have just triggered the biggest discovery in galactic history. The thing above roared, its cry echoing through crystal and stone, unlike anything Earth's wildlife had prepared her for. But Sarah Chen had stopped letting the unknown frighten her long ago. After all, every scientific breakthrough started with something unexpected. "Stay close," she told Venner as they reached the surface access. "And remember, no matter what happens next, we're making history, even if the assembly never knows it." The door cycled open, revealing the desert night and the massive shadow moving through it. Sarah raised her weapon, not to destroy, but to defend if necessary. Whatever secrets this frequency held, whatever had drawn this creature across space to find them, she was going to uncover the truth. The assembly had tried to silence progress, but they were about to learn why that never worked, especially when you got humans involved. The desert night exploded with crystalline shards as the creature emerged into full view. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was beautiful in its impossibility. Like living mercury, its form flowed and shifted, catching starlight and reflecting it in ways that defied physics. At its core, pulses of energy matched the exact frequency pattern they'd been studying. "Remarkable," Venner whispered, their skin rippling with complex patterns of excitement and fear. "It's not just drawn to the frequency, it's generating it." Sarah kept her weapon ready but lowered. "Not generating," she corrected, watching the creature's movements closely. "Translating. Look at how it interacts with the crystals." The mercury light being touched each crystal formation it passed, and with each contact, the resonance changed slightly. The patterns were familiar. Sarah had seen something similar in her original research, when the frequency seemed to adapt to different forms of matter. "It's a bridge," she realized, excitement overriding caution. The frequency isn't just a form of communication, it's a universal translator. That's why it works instantly across any distance. It's not sending signals through space. It's speaking the universal language of reality itself. Venner finished, their patterns brightening with understanding. The assembly wasn't suppressing a technology. They were hiding an entire level of existence. The creature turned toward them, its fluid form resolving into something vaguely humanoid. When it spoke, the words came not in sound, but in pure resonance, vibrating through the crystals around them. "Asterisk, you understand." Finally, asterisk. Sarah stepped forward, despite Venner's attempt to hold her back. "With scientists, understanding is what we do. Are you what the assembly is afraid of?" The being's form rippled. "Asterisk, the assembly fears what it cannot control. We are the resonance. We exist in the spaces between conventional matter, in the frequencies that bind reality together. Your discovery was not just finding us, it was beginning to speak our language." Asterisk. "That's why they exiled us," Venner said, their patterns shifting rapidly. "The Meridians weren't just discovering a new technology. We were on the verge of making first contact with an entirely unknown form of life." Suddenly, alarms blared from the facility below. One of Venner's researchers emerged from the access point, their skin pulsing with urgent patterns. Assembly ships detected in orbit. They're launching landing craft. Sarah's mind raced. The assembly must have detected the massive energy surge when the resonant arrived. Now everything was at risk. The Meridian facility, their research, and perhaps most importantly, the truth about what the frequency really meant. The resonance form shifted again. Asterisk, they come to bury the truth again. But perhaps this time we can show them why understanding is better than fear. Asterisk. How? Sarah asked, already formulating plans. They'll destroy everything before they let this get out. Asterisk, you have already begun to speak our language, Commander Chen. The frequency you discovered, it is not just communication, it is connection. Through it, we can show them what you have learned, what humanity's curiosity has unveiled. Asterisk. Venner's patterns suddenly shifted to what Sarah had learned to recognize as inspiration. The facility's transmission array, We've been trying to enhance it for years. With your understanding of the frequency and the resonance direct connection, we could broadcast the truth to every assembly ship in range. Sarah finished, her heart racing. Not just data, actual understanding. They couldn't bury that. Asterisk yes, asterisk. The resonant flowed toward the facility's entrance. Asterisk but it will require trust. Between all of us asterisk. Sarah looked at Venna, seeing her own determination reflected in the meridian's shifting patterns. Together, they followed the resonant below ground, even as the first tremors of assembly landing craft shook the desert's surface. The facility's main chamber hummed with energy as they worked, human intuition combining with meridian precision, and the resonance fundamental understanding of the frequency itself. Sarah's hands flew over adapted controls, her mind racing as she applied everything she'd learned about the frequency to this new purpose. Assembly forces approaching the outer perimeter, a researcher reported. Their weapons are charged. Let them come, Sarah said, making final adjustments. They're about to learn why humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, it's our ability to build bridges they never thought possible. The resonant merged with the crystal array, its forms spreading through the facility's systems like quicksilver. Venna's patterns swirled with complex equations as they aligned the transmission array. And Sarah, her hands steady despite everything, prepared to broadcast a truth that would change the galaxy forever. Ready? She asked her unlikely allies. Venna's skin glowed with affirmation. The resonance energy pulsed in harmony with the crystals. Above, assembly forces approached, ready to bury another secret in the desert sands. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the array. The frequency burst outward, not just carrying data but understanding itself. Through crystals and space, across conventional barriers, and through the spaces between, the truth of what they discovered reached out to touch minds that had never dreamed of such connection. In orbit, assembly ships froze as their crews experienced direct contact with the resonance for the first time. On the surface, advancing forces stopped as the frequency showed them what their leaders had tried to hide, but the galaxy was far more complex and beautiful than they'd been taught. And in the heart of the facility, a human scientist, an exiled researcher, and a being of pure frequency stood together, proving that the greatest discoveries come not from control, but from cooperation. The assembly had tried to stop progress by burying it in the desert. Instead, they'd helped create exactly the kind of connection they'd feared, one that would change everything. Sarah smiled as the frequency carried their message to the stars. Sometimes, the best way to break silence was to teach everyone a new way to speak. The assembly's response came not in weapons fire, but in silence. The landing forces had halted their advance, their troops standing motionless as the frequency's revelation washed over them. In orbit, the warships hung suspended against the stars, their crews experiencing direct contact with the resonance for the first time. Sarah monitored the readings from the facility's central chamber, watching as the frequency rippled through conventional space. They're listening, she said, her voice tight with anticipation. But how long before their training overcomes their wonder? Venna's skin displayed concerned patterns. The assembly's power structure is built on control. Even truth can be seen as a weapon when it threatens that control. As if confirming their fears, new alerts flashed across the facility's screens. The resonant, still merged with the crystal array, pulsed with warning. Asterisk more ships approaching. The assembly calls for reinforcements asterisk. They're not just calling ships. One of Venna's researchers reported, their patterns shifting with alarm. Long-range sensors detect quantum communications. They're activating sleeper cells on every exile world in the sector. Sarah's mind raced with implications. How many exile worlds? Dozens, Venna replied, bringing up a stellar map. Points of light marked planets where the assembly had buried its problems, and its secrets were not the only ones they've tried to silence. Scientists, philosophers, artists, anyone who threatened to push beyond their established bounds. Then let's wake them up. Sarah moved to the communication array, her fingers flying over the controls. The assembly created their own opposition network without realizing it. Every exile world, every buried truth, we can reach them all through the frequency. The resonance form rippled with approval. Asteriskius. The frequency connects all points in space. Distance is irrelevant. Boundaries meaningless asterisk. But we'll need help managing the connections. Venner pointed out their patterns showing concern. The facility's systems weren't designed for this scale of transmission. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that had always worried her supervisors back on Earth. Then let's redesign them. The assembly thinks humans are reckless. Let's show them what we can really do when we stop playing by their rules. The next hours were a blur of activity. Sarah and Venner worked to modify the facility's transmission systems, while other Meridian researchers made contact with exile communities across the sector. The resonant provided insights into the frequency's true nature, helping them understand how to strengthen and stabilize their connections. Reports began flowing in from other worlds. A group of exiled quantum theorists on a frozen moon had already built a receiver. Philosopher engineers in a gas giant's atmosphere offered processing power. Artists living in asteroid colonies volunteered to help visualize the data for different species. But the assembly wasn't idle. Their reinforcement fleet grew larger by the hour, and their sleeper agents on various worlds began moving to suppress the growing rebellion. Energy surge. A researcher called out. Assembly ships are charging weapons. The facility shook as the first bombardment began. Crystal formations on the surface shattered, but the underground networks held. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing concern. The assembly ships were being careful, targeting only the surface structures, trying to cut them off without risking damage to their own forces. They're being cautious, she observed. They still don't fully understand what they're dealing with. We can use that. Venner's patterns shifted questioningly. How? The assembly's greatest weapon has always been isolation, Sarah explained, moving to the central console. They separate species, control information, bury discoveries that could bring people together. But now, she gestured to the network of connections they built. Now we have something they never planned for, true communication, not just between worlds, but between different forms of existence itself. The resonant pulsed with understanding. You propose we show them the full potential of the frequency asterisk. More than that. Sarah's hands flew over the controls, making adjustments. I propose we give them a choice. Right now, they're fighting to maintain control. But what if we could show them a galaxy where control isn't necessary, where understanding replaces fear? Another bombardment rocked the facility. Warning lights flashed as surface sensors went dark. But underground, in the crystal networks that spiraled through the planet's crust, something was building. The frequency was changing, growing stronger, more complex. What's happening? Venner asked, their patterns swirling with mixed fear and excitement. The frequency isn't just carrying our message anymore, Sarah explained, watching the readings with growing amazement. It's carrying the response. Every exile, every hidden truth, every suppressed discovery, they're all connecting, building on each other. The assembly wanted to bury knowledge. They accidentally created the biggest think tank in galactic history. The resonance form expanded through the crystal networks, its energy merging with the growing wave of communication. The barriers between conventional space and our realm are thinning. Understanding flows both ways now. Above, the assembly fleet hung in space, their weapons charged but holding fire. On 100 worlds, exiles emerged from hiding, adding their voices to the growing chorus of discovery. And in the facility deep beneath the desert, a human scientist watched as her discovery grew into something even she hadn't imagined. They thought they could stop progress by burying it, Sarah said softly, watching the frequency patterns dance across her screens. Instead, they planted seeds. Now it's time to show them what grows in the dark. The facility trembled again, but this time not from weapons fire. The very frequency itself was changing, evolving, becoming something new. The assembly had tried to maintain control by keeping species separate, knowledge fragmented, understanding limited. They were about to learn why that never worked. Especially when you got humans involved in the equation. The assembly's reinforcement fleet arrived in waves, their ships emerging from hyperspace like a storm of crystalline arrows. But they found themselves facing something unprecedented, a network of worlds awakened and united through the frequency. Sarah watched from the facility's command center as reports flooded in from across the sector. Exiled quantum theorists on Helios 7 have adapted their gravity wells to amplify the frequency. Venner reported, their patterns shifting with excitement. The assembly can't maintain formation near their system. The artist colonies in the Carina Nebula are broadcasting visual translations of resonant communication. Another researcher added, half the assembly fleet's crew are beginning to understand what we're really showing them. Sarah nodded, her focus on the tactical display where assembly ships moved in increasingly erratic patterns. Some maintained their attack positions, while others hung back, their crews clearly conflicted about what they were experiencing through the frequency. They're fighting themselves now, she observed. Not just us. Every shot they fire, every world they threaten, it all gets transmitted back to them through the frequency. They're feeling the impact of their own actions. The resonant, its form now spread throughout the facility's crystal network, pulsed with agreement. Asterisk understanding breeds empathy. Empathy makes blind obedience impossible. Asterisk. A massive explosion lit up the tactical display. One of the assembly's primary command ships had just been disabled, not by weapons, but by its own crew. They're receiving our full broadcast. Venner's patterns swirled with triumph. The truth about why they exile people, about what the frequency really means. Their own people are turning against them. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The assembly built their power on isolation and control. But humans? We build connections. We take broken pieces and make them into something new. And now, she gestured to the display, when more assembly ships were breaking formation. The frequency carried not just communication now, but understanding, the accumulated knowledge of countless exiled minds working together. Every suppressed discovery, every buried truth, all flowing freely between worlds. Alert, a researcher called out. New energy signature detected. Something's coming through hyperspace, something big. The space above the desert world tore open, and through the rift emerged a ship unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It seemed to bend light around itself, its hull shifting between states of matter like the resonance themselves. The assembly core, Venner whispered, their patterns showing a mix of fear and awe. Their ruling council. They've never directly intervened before. The massive ship's arrival seemed to freeze the battle. Both loyal assembly forces and rebellious crews waited to see what would happen next. Sarah felt the facility's crystal networks pulse as the resonant responded to this new development. Asterisk, they come to witness, asterisk, the resonant communicated. Asterisk, what happens here will determine the future of all species, asterisk. The assembly core ship broadcast on all frequencies, conventional and otherwise. The voice that filled the facility carried the weight of centuries of absolute authority. This ends now, it declared. You have disrupted the natural order. Control must be maintained. Progress must be managed, for the good of all. Sarah stepped forward, her hands steady on the console. You're right about one thing, she transmitted back. This does end now, but not the way you think. She nodded to Venner, who initiated the sequence they'd been preparing. Throughout the facility, crystal networks blazed with energy. The resonance form expanded, merging with their transmission systems in ways that defied conventional physics. You built your power on keeping secrets, Sarah continued, watching as the frequency carried her words to every ship, every world, every being in range. Exiling those who discovered too much. Burying truths you thought too dangerous, but you forgot something important. The facility's power core hummed as they channeled more energy into the broadcast. On the tactical display, exile worlds lit up one by one, adding their voices to the transmission. You forgot that truth doesn't die when you bury it. It grows, it evolves, and when you gather enough buried truths in one place, the frequency peaked, carrying not just words now but pure understanding. Through the crystal networks, through the resonance natural connection to the fundamental forces of reality, through technology built by 100 exiled species working together, the truth flowed outward. Every assembly ship, every world, every being connected to their network experienced it simultaneously, the full knowledge of what the frequency meant, not just a form of communication, but a key to understanding reality itself. The resonance weren't just another species, they were living proof that existence was far more complex and beautiful than the assembly's rigid controls could account for. Your choice is simple, Sarah declared, her voice carried on waves of pure understanding. You can keep trying to control progress, to bury knowledge, to exile those who see too much. Or, she paused, watching as the assembly core ship hung silent in space, its crew experiencing the full impact of the frequency's revelation. Or you can join us, learn with us, build with us, because humanity has learned one thing above all others: the universe is too amazing to face alone. The facility fell silent as her words faded. Above, the assembly fleet hung motionless. The core ship's presence loomed over everything. Its next action would determine the fate of not just this rebellion, but of how knowledge itself would be treated across the galaxy. Sarah Chen, exiled scientist, stood in an underground facility on a desert world, surrounded by others who had been cast aside for knowing too much. And she waited to see if the assembly would choose to keep burying the truth, or finally learn to let it grow. The assembly core ship's response came not in words, but in action. Its massive form began to change, the hull shifting and flowing like liquid metal until it resembled the fluid state of the resonance themselves. Through the frequency network, Sarah felt the shock ripple through every connected mind in the sector. They knew, she whispered, understanding dawning. The assembly leadership, they've been in contact with the resonance all along. The core ship's transmission carried notes of both resignation and relief. We discovered the truth centuries ago, the Council's voice echoed through the facility. The frequency, the resonance, the true nature of space-time itself. We believed the galaxy wasn't ready. That knowledge had to be controlled, distributed slowly, carefully. Asterisk, you feared chaos. Asterisk, the resonant pulsed through the crystal networks. Asterisk, but in trying to prevent it, you created something worse. Stagnation. Asterisk. Venice patterns shifted with sudden insight. That's why you exiled us all to the same sectors. You weren't just hiding us. You were containing the knowledge, keeping it quarantined until you decided the time was right. But you didn't count on humanity, Sarah added, a smile playing at her lips. We don't wait for permission to understand things. We don't follow the expected paths of development. We take shortcuts, make connections others miss, and most importantly, we share what we learn. The facility's screens showed assembly ships throughout the sector powering down their weapons. On countless exile worlds, hidden communities emerged from their shelters, adding their voices to the growing chorus of discovery and understanding. The Council's next words carried a tone of curiosity. You would have us simply release all knowledge, remove all controls. The galaxy would descend into chaos. No, Sarah countered, her hands moving across the facility's controls. We're offering something better. Look at what we've built here. Not chaos, but cooperation. Different species, different forms of existence, all working together. Learning from each other, building something new. Through the frequency network, she transmitted images. Meridian scientists working alongside human intuition. Artist colonies translating resonant concepts into forms others could understand. Exiled philosophers and engineers combining their knowledge in ways the assembly had never imagined. You tried to bury progress, she continued. Instead, you created the perfect environment for it to flourish. Every exile you sent carried pieces of a larger truth. Now those pieces have come together, and they're showing us a way forward that doesn't require control, just understanding. The core ship's form continued to shift, its appearance now a stunning hybrid of conventional technology and resonant fluidity. And you believe you can manage this transition, this freedom. Asterisk, they already are asterisk, the resonant pulsed. Asterisk, look at what they've achieved in mere days. Imagine what could be accomplished if we all worked together openly asterisk. Sarah felt a shift in the frequency. The assembly fleet's crews were changing, their rigid adherence to protocol giving way to curiosity and wonder. The network of exile worlds pulsed with potential, countless minds ready to share their discoveries. The choice is yours, she transmitted to the council. Keep trying to control the flow of knowledge, fighting a battle you've already lost. Or join us in building something new. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our determination, it's our ability to adapt, to bring people together, to find new ways forward. Silence fell across all frequencies. In the facility, Sarah stood with Venla and the Resonant, 3 different forms of life united by the pursuit of understanding. Above, the assembly core ship hung suspended between stars, its form still shifting between states as if reflecting the choice before them. Finally, the council spoke again. Perhaps it is time for the assembly to evolve, to become something more than controllers of knowledge, to learn how to guide rather than restrict. The core ship's next transmission went to every assembly vessel and installation in the galaxy. The exiled protocols are hereby suspended. All restrictions on cross-species research and development are lifted. The frequency network will be acknowledged and studied openly. Cheers erupted throughout the facility. Venus patterns blazed with joy, while the resonance form pulsed with harmonious energy. But the council wasn't finished. Commander Sarah Chen, they continued, your exile is not only lifted but transformed. We offer you a new position, liaison between conventional space and resonant reality. You will help guide this transition, teaching others what you've discovered about bringing different forms of existence together. Sarah looked around the facility, at the Meridian researchers who had become colleagues, at the Resonant who had helped them understand the true nature of reality, at the network of worlds and minds now connected through the frequency she had helped discover. I accept, she said simply. On one condition, we do this as equals. No more assembly control, no more buried truths. We learn together, grow together, face the unknown together. Agreed, the council responded, and through the frequency network, Sarah felt the truth of their commitment. The assembly had tried to exile her to a harsh desert world, hoping to bury both her and her discovery in the sand. Instead, they had helped create exactly what they had feared, a galaxy where knowledge flowed freely, where different species and forms of existence worked together, where progress couldn't be controlled because it grew from cooperation rather than competition. As the facility hummed with activity, preparing to become the first of many new research centers, Sarah Chen smiled. The frequency had started as a scientific discovery, become a tool of revolution, and ended as something even greater, a bridge between all forms of life and understanding. The assembly had tried to stop progress by burying it in the desert. Instead, they had planted a garden where the future could grow wild and free. And humanity, as always, was ready to help it flourish.